I think this is like a good way to determine if a loop is good. If you listen to a loop and you like think like, oh, I can easily make that loop is bad, okay? But if you listen to a loop and you're like, oh my god, this is so intricate, so complex, save it and use that in your next song because that is an asset that you should use. Hi, I'm Noel, and today I'm going to be breaking down the music behind my song, The Deep. So this song all started off with this ambience that kind of gave it the character of the song. I'll play it really quick. And I think putting ambience in your songs is like really important to give it that character and kind of place the listener into a space. Once I found this ambience, I knew that I wanted this song to be water themed and about like the deep. I wrote some quick lyrics that I sent to my songwriter on the topic that I wanted her to write about. So this is what I sent her. I'm gasping for air, trying to get out of this nightmare. I wish I was only asleep, but you're bringing me down to the deep. And these are lyrics that I wrote just based off like the vibe and the feeling of that ambience. For the rest of the ambience of the song, I also have this tonal ambience that's playing throughout. And this tonal ambience is really important because it kind of matches the key of the song. And I think it's really important to have like these like long droning ambiences, especially if you have like chord changes, because the note that this ambience is in kind of informs the chord progression. So that's say that your key is in C and you have an ambience that's on the note C for like the entire time. And if when you're changing chords, like you change from like the C major chord to G major chord, the note C in the G major chord is the fourth, which would give you that suspended fourth feel. So you have like your piano would be playing G, but the ambience is playing the note C, so it kind of like makes your chord richer, you know? And each new chord that you change to, the ambience will have a new character. So I'll play these together. And then I'll play it with the chords. Kind of get a feeling of it. Kind of hear it too. That's the ambience. Yeah, so that's what the verse sounds like. And then so another big part of this song that I think gives a lot of its character is the string part. Since I come from an orchestral background, I like to write string parts like how an orchestra is structured. So there's like violin 1, violin 2, violas, cellos, and double bass. And the reason why orchestras were set up that way is because like they didn't have mixing engineers back then, so they had to kind of balance the frequencies by like the number of players in each section, so that like when you heard the orchestra in a hall, like it sounded really full, you know? And the only way to balance that is just like if you need more highs, then you just like have more violin players in the violin section. If you need more bass, you just have more bass players. This is the cello part that I wrote. And here's the viola part. Here's the violin part. Yeah, it's kind of playing throughout the track, and in the drop, in between the supersaws, like these strings come in and out, so it's kind of brings you back to like this original melody. The second part of the song I kind of wanted to go over was, I guess, the saws. And I think I did something pretty interesting here. Like, saws are, it's like a very classic EDM thing that everyone in like pretty much every song uses. And even though it's like so common, I feel like it's still really hard to like get them right because there is such a high standard on how full and like how bright you want your saws to be. So this is kind of like the way I build them. it's kind of like a bottom up, just like how I build my orchestra section. So I have like a sub, and then I have like this mid bass, and then I have a square layer that I put in mono. The reason why I put the square layer in mono is so my stereo field has more differences. In terms of like stereo separation, everyone is always trying to make their stuff like as wide as possible. For stereo, you have to realize that stereo is all about differences, okay? So if everything is wide, nothing's going to seem wide. But if you have something that's really wide that is paired with something that's mono or something that's super narrow, the differences between those will make the thing that's super wide seem even wider. So anytime you have like a bunch of things that you want to seem wide, you want to make them really wide, pick and choose some of them to make more mono, and then choose some others to make wider. So here's my square layer, completely mono, and then I have like my standard saw layer. Another thing that's important about supersaws is your voicings of the chords. One thing is that as you get higher up the frequency spectrum, you can put more notes together. When you're lower in the frequency spectrum for like your sub and like your mid bass, you don't want to have like the thirds, the second, the fourths. You only want to have like the fundamentals, like the first, the root of the chord, or sometimes even the fifth, okay? But as you get higher, my square has, like you can see here, it has 3 notes, which is like root, third, and fifth, you know? And then my saw, which is like a higher frequency thing, I'm able to add more notes in there because there's more frequencies, because like the frequency spectrum is like logarithmic, you know? You're able to put more notes that are closer together and it still will sound good. Whereas in the very low part of the frequency spectrum, if you have like a third or a second, it'll sound really muddy. So here's the saws. You can tell that these chords are a little more complex. They have like 7s, seconds, and fourths, you know? I consider that part of like the lower group of the super saw. They have like their own kind of sidechain because I typically want a longer sidechain for lower frequency things. For the higher part of the super saw, I have this arp layer. And one thing that I wanted to talk about this arp layer is like this utility right here. The width is like 174%, and I think the utility is like the most underrated stereo width plugin. Basically what it does is it takes the existing width that you have in your signal and it just like makes it louder. So if your signal is already like somewhat wide, it will just decrease the volume of the mid channel and increase the volume of the sides channel, which will allow you to like make your sound seem much wider. And if you want to like clear space in your mids, this is a much better way of doing it, and it's completely phase free. The only caveat is that there has to be some sides information in your channel already. If you do this to a mono sound, since it doesn't have any sides information, there's nothing to boost. Nothing would happen. So I have that, and then I have this white noise layer, which is also like super wide. And white noise is very important for super saws because once you start getting to the really high frequencies, saw waves start to sound really harsh, and then white noise can be less harsh than a saw wave. So typically what I would do is, like you see here in the super saws, cut off all the highs around like 10K of the saw layers and just let the white noise sit there and like fill that up. And then the last part of this super saw I think is the most important is like this choir layer. This is where, because this is the highest melodic layer, this is where I was able to stack the most notes. So here is the MIDI for this choir layer, and you can see that I have like many notes that are like basically next to each other, like G, A sharp, and those all give like the chords like these harmonic textures. They're called like cluster tones. So in the very high layers, all these cluster tones will just give the chord a lot more texture. And the way you choose these, the best ones to do are the second and the fourth of the chord. It's really important that your foundation of the chord, like the first, the third, and the fifth, is already set before you start adding these like flavor tones. And I'll play these choirs right here. You can tell like it's very harmonically rich. With a lot of notes really close together. And if you listen to this by itself, you wouldn't necessarily be able to know what chord you are listening to. But if you play it with all of these bottom layers that have really solidified the foundation, like the root and the fifth, then it's really easy to hear. So how I did that effect was I got the auto pan, I automated the amount and like the rate to come down, and then I copied the auto pan to every layer, and then on the layer I set the phase to 180, so it has the same rate automation, but it's like going like side to side in the stereo field. For the drop, the drums are pretty simple. Actually, I don't know if they're pretty simple. I'll just play them really quick. So the kick and snare pattern is pretty simple, but there's a lot of like things in between that kind of like make it more like spicy. So there is this reverse kick that I think is really important if you want to make like a kick like more thumpy. So it's like boom. And then I have this tom layer, which is like super distorted, and it's just kind of there as an accent, and you can kind of hear it with this. Another thing that's really important is for your snare. If you have like a snare that has reverb on it, and you want to make your song like really aggressive, it's very important to control the reverb. If you look at my snare, I have this mute automation happening at the end after the reverb, so that you can kind of see that this mute automation follows my kick pattern. So if you listen to just like the kick and snare together, the mute will come in when the next kick comes in, so that it's much cleaner. One other interesting percussion I have is just these loops. I actually think it's really important to use loops in your songs, but the only thing is make sure the loops are really good. I feel like so many people use loops that are bad. I think this is like a good way to determine if a loop is good. If you listen to a loop and you think like, oh, I can easily make that loop is bad, okay? But if you listen to a loop and you're like, oh my god, this is so intricate, so complex, save it and use that in your next song, because that is an asset that you should use. So I have like these really cool sounding loops here. There's a lot of like textures, you know, it's like, and there's this one. Obviously, you know, like I messed with it a little bit just to fit the groove of my song. Another trick that I did with these loops is I used the Haas effect, where you delay one of the signals, like, so I have this one is like 1 millisecond, the other side, the right side is 10 milliseconds, and then on the other loop, it's the other way around, so that it kind of gives like these really wide feel. The important thing about the Haas effect is that it is not that mono-compatible, so you can't use it on anything that's like too important. But this is just like some flavor percussion, so I thought it was fine. Other than that, I think everything else is pretty simple, just like, you know, a basic like kind of dubsteppy kind of groove. Second drop, the bass sounds. Yeah, I have it here. Let's see how I made this. I don't even know exactly how I made it, but I just found some crazy wavetable, Atlantis and Drugs wavetable. This is like my push-pull automation, which changes the wavetable position here. It changes the cutoff of this phase filter. And then it also changes this drive. So like at the beginning of the sound, it's like more distorted, and then it becomes less distorted, and then also automates the flanger depth. I think another part of the sound that really makes it really cool is just like the pitch bend. because the pitch bend will play each wavetable in like a different way. So that's like the bass, and then it plays along with the sub. That's the same sub that I had from earlier. And then I have this sound, and to be honest, I don't exactly remember how I made it, but let me see if I can try to. Oh yeah, it's this one. Okay, so basically I just like found a preset, but I played it in a range that like you wouldn't normally play something, because like this is what this preset is supposed to sound like. It's like it's a bass Ray voltage, just like that's like a Ray volt kind of bass. But I played it so low that like this rhythm, that is like the hertz of the sound. Like I played it at like 20 hertz, so low in the piano roll. It's like, yeah, like G sharp -1, you know? So it like created this crazy tone that like I didn't even expect it. So I just bounced that, put it over here, here it is. And then because it doesn't really have any tonality, I just played the sub along with the same rhythm, but I gave like the sub the notes, so it kind of like brought it all together. And then the second half, all it is that same sound, but reversed, and then one little like double glitch. Yeah, that's it. Ever since my song Gold and Silver last year, I've been making all the visuals for my song. So that includes Gold and Silver, Try to Pretend, I Hope You're Okay, The Shadow, and also this song, The Deep. So my general process that I use to make visuals is I render out all the images in Cinema 4D, then I go into After Effects to make it sync up with the music, and then I cut up everything in Premiere Pro, and then that's how I make my videos. Alright, so now I'm going to break down how I made the visuals and the art for this track. So obviously I had like the idea from like the lyrics of like drowning and being in the deep, so I wanted to make it look like someone was underwater and like falling. So the first thing that I did was I made this figure in this program called Daz 3D, and I'm not going to pull it up because if I do pull it up, the girl will be completely naked with like nipples and like ass, and this video will become like unsuitable for children. So I put the model into Cinema 4D, and it kind of had like the position that I wanted, like someone falling, and I like created that in Daz 3D. Okay, and then the way that I created the light rays was I had this caustics disc where it has basically like this pattern that kind of looks like this, and then I had the light shine through it so that when you render the picture, it looks like there's light rays coming out of it. One other thing that I did was just to make the textures of the water look like more cool, was cloned a bunch of little balls and dispersed them throughout the image, so it kind of looks like there's particles floating in the water. Okay, so this was my first draft, and you can see that it has the rays like coming down here, and I have like these bubbles. And then this was after the color grading, but I kind of wanted to make these rays a little bit more textured and have like more lines. So this is like my second draft, and I like obviously there's more rays, but I thought it was a little too much, so I kind of eventually ended up here. This was like my final version with like the bubbles and the rays coming down, and the way I got it to look this color is just Lightroom color grading. Thank you for checking out this breakdown video of The Deep. If you haven't checked out the song yet and you have no idea what I'm talking about and you're really confused, you can check out the lyric video on my channel. If you have any other questions about the music or like the visuals or my general creative process, please let me know in the comments and I will get back to you.